Carl Cadieux stands in front of the downtown elementary school where he's a janitor. Next to the school, there's a traffic light and crosswalk. Cadieux says on Wednesday he saw a police cruiser go through a red light without its light flashing. Cadieux says children were about to cross with their parents, so he called out to the officer, telling him he'd gone through the light. Cadieux says the cruiser made a U-turn, and the officer got out and became aggressive. He grabbed me, handcuffed me, roughed me up, and threw me in the car, Cadieux says. Nadia Lessard was also standing outside the school. She's a teacher, 40 years old, with 4 children of her own. She says some of her students were there and starting to cry, so she tried to calm the officer down. Lessard says at one point she reached out and touched the officer on the arm. In a fraction of a second, he grabbed my throat, Lessard says. Then he held a can of pepper spray 2 inches from my eyes and sprayed me in the face. Both she and the janitor were arrested and they're facing charges.
Just dozens of children bawling their eyes out, freaked out.
Dave Miller's daughter goes to the school.
It was the day of the Célébration de la Famille, so the celebration of Family Day that they've been preparing for. A beautiful, wonderful party full of love and happiness. And then, their janitor gets slammed into a car, and then one of their teachers gets slacked in the throat and pepper sprayed in the eyes.
Montreal's police force stops short of saying the officer did anything wrong. It says clearly events should not have taken place that way. Yann Lafreniere speaks for the Montreal police. He has some advice for other Montrealers if they think they see a police cruiser breaking the law.
You turn down 911, there will be a call, and the supervisor or the commanding officer from that officer is got duty to call you back to let you know what happened in the record.
Lafreniere says investigators are meeting with the officers involved, and next week will talk to the school principal to sort out what happened. Justin Hayward, CBC News, Montreal.
Unpresented to Silva in Rio de Janeiro. The World Cup has just begun, but already there is controversy on the pitch. The referee, the call, and the penalty shot. I'll tell you all about it later on the World of Six. The U.S. is sending an aircraft carrier to help Iraq fend off the Islamist militants who've taken over much of that country. But President Barack Obama says he will not order U.S. pilots into action until Iraq's prime minister deals with the deep internal divisions that have paralyzed his government. Keith Bogue has the story from Washington.
As Iraq spirals out of control, it's provoking urgent and desperate reactions at home and abroad. The country's top Shia cleric has called on all able-bodied men to take up arms in defense of their country. Both the United States and Iran, historically adversaries of each other and of Iraq, are now looking for ways to help Iraq. There are unconfirmed reports Iran has sent 3 Polish National Guard units to Iraq, and that they have already begun fighting in defense of the government. The U.S. has sent an aircraft carrier to the Persian Gulf, ready for whatever action President Barack Obama decides is needed.
We're not going to allow ourselves to be dragged back into a situation in which, while we're there, we're keeping a lid on things, and after enormous sacrifices by us, as soon as we're not there, people end up acting in ways that are not conducive to the long-term stability and prosperity of the country.
In other words, the U.S. is not prepared to pay a price for peace that will not hold. So the key, first and foremost, is political. Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki has to abandon what the Obama administration believes is a narrowly sectarian, dangerously provocative, and ultimately failed style of government.
My preference would be that Maliki step down, frankly.
Michael Hamlet is a security and intelligence scholar at the Brookings Institution who shares the widely held view that Maliki is the problem and that his resignation would be a step towards a solution.
Right. At a minimum, we have to get him to reconstitute the proper civilian control over the army and security forces that he has expropriated unto himself. He's got to share power more effectively. And then, if he does those things, I believe we can help him more militarily, perhaps even including airstrikes.
That's more or less what Obama seems to be looking for. He didn't say he'd prefer Maliki step down, but his mind may have drifted in that direction.
So this should be a wake-up call. Iraq's leaders have to demonstrate a willingness to make hard decisions and compromises on behalf of the Iraqi people in order to bring the country together.
So, the U.S. is prepared to use its might once again in Iraq, although not with troops on the ground. Exactly how should become clear within days. Keith Oak, CBC News, Washington.
The instability in Iraq is pushing up the price of crude oil, and that's going to trickle down to the price at the pump. Today, oil futures closed the week up 4.1%, the biggest weekly gain so far this year. That's good news for the oil industry, not so good news for drivers. The CBC's Briar Stewart has more.
As the world watches just what unfolds in Iraq, world markets are watching too.
People are very nervous because they think could expand on them.
Richard Dixon is with the School of Business at the University of Alberta. He points to a line graph that shows the rise and fall of world oil prices in recent years. And since 2010, those ups and downs have been largely due to one region.
This one here is Arab Spring, the start of it. So Libya, the uncertainty around the oil, and so what you get is what we call Middle East premium.
So because of the instability.
The instability.
That is what's driving the prices up. Iraq has the fifth largest proven reserves of crude in the world. It produces just over 3.3 million barrels of oil a day. Most of the country's production is centered in the southern region, which is still controlled by the Shia-led government. But today, President Barack Obama said world leaders are already talking about what needs to happen if the conflict spreads.
One of our goals should be to make sure that in cooperation with other countries in the region, not only are we creating some sort of backstop, but if there do end up being disruptions inside of Iraq, that some of the other producers in the Gulf are able to pick up the slack. So that'll be part of the consultations that will be taking place during the course of this week.
Far from the turmoil in Iraq, you may soon be noticing a jump in the price you pay when you fill up. But Dan McTagg says that doesn't make a lot of sense. He runs a price forecasting website called Tomorrow's Gas Prices Today. He says the Middle East does have an effect, but there's something else going on here.
When they see speculation, excessive speculation, driving prices to levels that are have no basis in fundamental supply and demand, where the world is awash in crude, particularly in North America.
And rising prices is good news if you're in the oil business, as Alberta very much is. A higher price for each barrel of crude means more royalties for the government. Analysts say that could add up to several $100 million over the next year. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Edmonton.
Ukrainian forces are making gains against pro-Russian separatists. Gunfighting raged today in the southern port city of Mariupol. 5 separatists and 2 Ukrainian soldiers were killed before the rebels retreated. There are reports tonight that tanks and heavy weapons are being moved into eastern Ukraine. The U.S. State Department says Russia is sending them to the separatists. There seems to be disagreement over who will pay for the search for flight MH370. Crews are still looking for the Malaysia airline jet that disappeared in March. A Malaysian official says his country will split the bill with Australia, which is coordinating search efforts. But Australia's transport minister says the issue of expense is still being discussed. It could take years to find the plane and cost tens of millions of dollars. How much is your reputation worth? For Joe Fontana, former federal cabinet minister and current mayor of London, Ontario, about $1,700. Fontana was criminally convicted today for submitting paperwork from his son's wedding reception as a government expense. The CBC's Kerry McKee has been covering the trial in London and has our story. London Mayor Joe Fontana told a throng of reporters he felt optimistic as he entered the courthouse this morning. The feeling wouldn't last. Justice Bruce Thomas rejected much of the evidence presented in Fontana's defense. At issue was a contract with a local banquet hall that hosted Fontana's son's wedding in 2005. At the time, Fontana was Federal Minister of Labor and Housing. Fontana admitted during his trial that he changed several details of the wedding contract so it appeared to relate to a political event for then Finance Minister Ralph Goodale. Fontana added MP to his name on the document, used whiteout and an eraser to alter the dates and the reason for the event, and then signed his name over his wife's signature. Using the new contract, Fontana claimed a $1,700 rental fee as a government expense. But in court, Fontana insisted he didn't want to pocket the money. He felt an obligation that the banquet hall get paid for holding the room for Goodale's visit. Enter Vince Travado, the former president of the hall and Fontana's friend of 40-plus years. He supported the story, testifying he booked the political event for Fontana, but then went on to admit he didn't create any paperwork or organize food or staff. Justice Thomas didn't buy it. In his ruling, he said that Fontana's defense defied belief. What's more, he concluded that Fontana and Travato, together or separately, concocted the story in an attempt to avoid conviction. And while Thomas found it baffling that Fontana would risk his career for a mere $1,700, it did not deter him from convicting Fontana on all counts: fraud, breach of trust, and forgery. Fontana welled up with tears after hearing the verdict.
Well, I'm very surprised, shocked, devastated by, obviously, the verdict. And obviously, I'm so appreciative of the support that I've gotten from my legal team, my wife, my kids, supporters. And I regret that all this had to happen. And especially for the people of London, but I'll have something to say in the near future.
Former London City Council member Gina Barber is among many who say it's time for Fontana to step down.
Yeah, do the honorable thing. It should have happened a long time ago, or he should have stepped aside when he had that opportunity. Now there's nothing left to do but step down.
Fontana has so far defied all calls for him to resign, and he can't be forced out of office unless he goes to prison, something that could happen at his sentencing hearing next month. Carrie McKee, CBC News, London. The Supreme Court of Canada today ruled that Canadians do have a right to privacy when it comes to their online accounts, and that police need to get a search warrant before asking internet search providers to hand over details, such as names and addresses. As James Cutmore tells us, it's a decision some see as a rebuke of the Conservative government's efforts to make it easier for law enforcement to get such information.
I was a little bit disappointed in the Supreme Court.
Ottawa Police Sergeant Francois Daou investigates child pornography online. He says his work is complicated. Investigators first have to find the criminal activity online and then determine who is behind it by investigating their internet address. They do that by asking internet service providers which person has been assigned that address.
We would usually receive that same information within a day or two.
Those requests have now been declared unconstitutional. The Supreme Court ruled Canadians have an expectation of anonymity online and a right not to have that privacy breached by the state. The court said those warrantless police requests amounted to unreasonable search and seizure. Now, Police Sergeant Daou says his work will become even more complex.
We'll certainly slow down many of our investigations.
The Canadian Civil Liberties Association, on the other hand, is ecstatic. Sukanya Pillay is the executive director of that group. Pillay says the ruling demonstrates there's no shortcut for police around charter rights.
What this decision says is, if you want the information, you need a warrant, and that's important.
But the ruling is perhaps even more important for what it says about privacy rights in the digital era.
The Supreme Court of Canada seems to clearly get the internet.
David Fraser is a lawyer and privacy expert from Halifax. He says the government can no longer say digital information like an IP address is only as private as a phone number. That's been the government's take on the question of what constitutes private information in the digital age, and it's an approach that's cropped up in legislation.
Certainly the government has advanced positions suggesting that, no, this is just phone book information. This isn't very sensitive information. We don't really have a privacy interest in it. The Supreme Court of Canada decision says otherwise.
Fraser says there's no direct legal impact on two bills currently before Parliament that deal with crime and digital privacy. That's 4 and C-13, though others contend there definitely is. What everyone agrees is that the ruling must be seen as a turning point in the legal understanding of what constitutes personal information in the 21st century and what constitutes state interference in our digital lives. Fraser says in that context, the government would be wise to rethink its approach to privacy. The government says it's reviewing the decision. James Cutmore, CBC News, Ottawa.
A Quebec teenager is facing hacking-related charges after 5 credit card numbers and some 22,000 passwords appeared online. The RCMP say they started investigating with FBI help after one of Bell Canada's IT suppliers was cyber-hacked. Police say the teen is believed to be a member of the hacktivist group No Crew. They allege it has hacked into computers of businesses, schools, and government agencies. There's a lot of head-scratching still going on in Ontario tonight after the surprise majority win by the Liberal Party in yesterday's provincial election. Few, even the winner, expected to do more than just scrape by. But as Laura Lynch tells us, the alternative would have involved a lot of fiscal pain that voters were unwilling to endure.
We have got
supporters on the steps of the legislature this morning, Kathleen Wynne took a moment to smile and told reporters it's time to get to work. I'm waiting for the easy day in political life. this may be the closest to it, but Wynne and the Liberals defied the pundits and the polls. A party in power for more than a decade, weathering scandals and a swollen deficit. They pulled out not only a win, but a majority. Still, the party picked up only 1% in the popular vote. Wynne knows she has work to do. We have a huge responsibility, and when I said last night to the people of Ontario that I will do everything in my power every day to earn and keep their trust, I mean that. From the winner to the night's big loser, Progressive Conservative leader Tim Hudak.
But I will not be leading the Ontario BC Party in the next election campaign.
Yuki Kurosawa of York University calls the PC collapse the biggest surprise of the election.
The Conservative vote really crumbled over the course of the election, and in particular, obviously, last night. So we saw that there was really a leakage of Conservative voters towards the NDP, or in fact, much more towards the Liberal Party.
That came after Hudak campaigned partly on a promise to slash 100,000 civil service jobs. Political science professor Lydia Miljan from the University of Windsor says Liberals and unions pounced on that to stir fears. It just defies logic how a party could basically sell job losses. I think parties always have to sell hope. Conservatives in Ottawa may be watching closely given that a federal election is coming in the next year. York University's Kurosawa suggests there's a lesson for them when it comes to Ontario.
They have to be very careful with a campaign that veers towards the hard right on economic or social matters.
Wynne and the Liberals veered left with their promises of more spending. She now faces paying for the promises she made, even as she contends with Ontario's difficult fiscal reality and fragile economy. Laura Lynch, CBC News, Toronto. Kathleen Wynne's big win in Beaubridge, Ontario will of course have ramifications in Ottawa. Joining me now to assess the fallout is the CBC's Ontario Political Affairs Specialist, Robert Fisher. Robert, what impact might this majority Liberal victory have on the federal Conservatives heading into an election next year?
So I think they're very definitely going to have to rethink their agenda, because the federal Tories, Martina, were counting very heavily on the Hudak agenda. Very right-wing. Some people in this province called it Tea Party-ish. That kind of agenda really working, really igniting interest in the provincial Tories. In fact, in last night's election,